Welcome back to another episode of Your Hope-Filled Perspective, where it's always our goal to restore hope, renew minds, and empower listeners to live in their God-given identity. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Bengtson, and I'm so thrilled you've joined us for another episode. Today, we're going to be talking about hope for breaking the cycle of mother-daughter dysfunction. Today's guest is an experienced mother wounds, and she went on to break the cycle of mother-daughter dysfunction for her own children. She always says, we are not a perfect family, but a bonded family. So she's here today to share hope and the lessons that she has learned with us. I can relate to her story. Growing up in a home with a mother who was emotionally distant, really through no fault of her own, but she wasn't the mother that I wanted or needed until much later in life. So I think today's episode is going to resonate with so many people. The scripture verse, though, that I want us to camp on for this episode comes from Proverbs 3, verses 5 through 6. And it says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not rely on your own understanding. Think about him in all your ways, and he will guide you on the right paths. Today's guest is my friend, Phylis Mantelli. Phylis is a speaker, blogger, coach, and co-host of the podcast 24 Karat Conversations with Phylis and Rhonda. She's the author of the book Unmothered, Life with a Mother Who Couldn't Love Me. She's been married for 31 years and has 2 grown daughters. She's the grandmother of one adorable grandson with another grandbaby on the way. She loves to read, walk in her garden. She'll occasionally even break out and dance when she's cooking in her kitchen. I don't usually start off an episode this way, but I want you to hear how Phylis's journey is summarized on the back of her book. Phylis and her 2 siblings never know what to expect from their mom. The mom who bakes homemade chocolate chip cookies with hugs and smiles, or a raging, screaming mother who mocks and belittles them. The mom who cooks dinner, says a Hail Mary and promises she'll do better, or the drunk mother who brings men home from bars and leads them to her daughter's room to show them off. Phylis just wants a mom who loves her, who wants the best for her. But that mom rarely makes an appearance. Though it breaks her heart to leave her baby sister behind, Phylis moves out of her mother's house as soon as she's able, hoping one day she'll find the family of her dreams. What she discovers are more nightmares. Through it all, God never stops his pursuit of Phylis. And though she'd like nothing more than to turn her back on her mother, every time her mom reaches out, Phylis takes her hand. By God's grace, Phylis eventually breaks through the pain and replaces it with a heart of a daughter who loves her mom unconditionally. Phylis, welcome to the program today.
Thank you so much. That's like amazing that you I was like, wow. Can't believe I've gone through that whole thing.
But you have.
Yeah.
You went through it and you're now on the other side. And friend, that's part of the reason I wanted to have you on the program, because I know so many, both those that I treated through my private practice and just friends that I have who struggle with their mother-daughter relationship. And what they need is to hear from someone like you that there is hope. What you see is not necessarily where you have to stay. So let's back things up a little bit, because so often our passion comes out of our own hurts and trials. So I'm curious, where did your passion for mentoring and encouraging and coaching women to walk through their confusing past and difficult relationships with their mothers come from? How does one go through such a horrible time and end up encouraging others through it?
Well, I have to say, the more I talk about this subject, it's so funny. I start remembering that God was always with me. So were raised as Catholics, and my mom had a very skewed, religion in her mind, and because she was ill. And so I always saw my mom praying, and we went to church. She would send us, but she wouldn't go later on. She was hungover from the night before, but she would send us. And so, I feel like God always had this plan. He was like, you're going to have this crazy life, but I'm going to be right next to you. And I started thinking back of all the times when I could hear his voice. I just didn't know that that was God.
Wow.
But I would have this intuition of just like, oh, maybe I should do this over here. Like I'm feeling different. And when I would listen to the voice, it would save me. When I ignored the voice, then I'd have to go through the trials. So it was just something that was innately always there. And now looking back, I feel like God knew all along. He was like, I'm going to go on this journey with you. It's going to be hard, but I am going to bring you out of it if you listen. And I think that's the thing is like, especially when you come from trauma and hard childhood, is that you feel, well, for one thing, you feel like your life is normal. You think chaos is normal. That's how you've grown up.
Right.
The flip side of that is then you can feel like you don't deserve a better life, because constantly the words were always, don't expect that. You're never going to get that. Like, this is a hard, cruel world. My mom she would try to toughen us up. She's full-blooded Portuguese. And so we had this, cultural thing where it was like, you had to shove everything down, pretend it was beautiful on the outside. The inside would be chaotic, but you had to be strong. So one of the things I will say, in a way, that was a gifting from my mom, was to learn how to be a strong woman and it's funny, she would give that to us, but she wouldn't give it to herself. So she was always abused by men, but she would tell us to be strong. And so I think sometimes, we have, again, it's that mix of like this chaotic normalcy, but then there was like this other flip side of, maybe there is something else out there that can be better. And so talk about hope-filled perspective. I had a lot of hope that things could be different, but when you don't have the right tools, it's really hard to know how to start.
Absolutely. Part of what you said that resonates with me is your mom didn't know any better. That was her normal, and out of her normal became your normal. And so for you, your existence and what you experienced felt normal. And when I was growing up and my mom went through severe clinical depression, only I didn't know that's what it was when I was growing up. I just thought that's the way she was, but she was emotionally distant. She wasn't warm and fuzzy. She wasn't, nurturing. But I remember thinking, well, that's just normal. That's just the way she is. But I also resonate with how you said that it can lead you into feeling like you don't deserve any better. But isn't it interesting, because you and I both know that is a lie from the pit of hell. And the other voice that you were hearing that was giving you hope, that was the Holy Spirit telling you, I'm with you. We're going to get through this, but you have to listen to my voice. And so much of what you were just saying there is, we have to be able to discern what voice we're listening to.
Right.
And we get a choice. Which voice are we going to listen to and follow?
Absolutely. And that's really what happened is when I was a young teenager, of course, every teen goes through their own drama. And I was angry, and I was really, honestly hated my mother, and just didn't understand until later the deepness of where she came from. And so at the moment, it was just, I wanted to get as far away from her as I could. The problem is that the things that I had learned were following me. And so I ended up making many mistakes along the way, drugs, alcohol, men, the whole 9 yards. And just really not giving myself the worth. And, really that little spark of like, could there be something better out there? Maybe, but I don't know. It's probably for other people, not for me. And so it really took years and years to realize that change is hard. For one, you really have to switch your thinking, and you really have to believe in something bigger than you. And you really have to let go of some of that generational talk that, parents that are dysfunctional are passing on to the next generation. And so that took a long time for me to understand that. But when I got that, that's what became my passion, is like, people that come from these broken homes keep continuing the same thing over and over and over, because we don't know any different. We go, well, that's how my mom did it. That's how my dad did it. But that doesn't make it right. And so I developed this huge passion when I finally got to a place of my own where I was raising my own healthy family. And that took, I was married once before. I lost a son from that marriage. I grieved, my son passing away, and thinking, oh, now I'm never going to be able to have a healthy family. But again, listening to God's voice, I had to suddenly be on my own and realize I had to stop clinging on to everybody else's wagon, right, to make me happy, and really do some deep soul searching. And in that soul searching, I realized that, I do deserve better, but I wasn't requiring enough from me to get better. So that was a huge wake-up call for me, is that I could ask for what I wanted. I was just used to taking whatever came along.
That's a pretty dramatic mindset shift.
Yeah, well, it took the death of my son to really wake myself up. I realized I was in a very, just another dysfunctional marriage. And I take responsibility for that. I tell people, I don't blame my ex-husband completely for everything, because it was my choice to go into that marriage knowing that I shouldn't have. I remember walking down the aisle, again, hearing that voice saying, this is my husband, no mom around to give me any advice. And so I thought, again, well, you got to suck it up and do it, because you said you would. And all I had to do was say, you know what? No, I'm not ready for this. And so that whole thing was a disaster from the beginning. And then I had actually left the marriage, and I found out I was pregnant. And so I thought, well, maybe God wants me to be a mom, and I'm going to be the best mom I can be. And then my son was born with congenital heart disease. And 3 days into the hospital, thankfully, I had a C-section, or I would have been home. He stopped breathing in the nursery. And so they came to me after many tests. They didn't know what was going on. And then they finally said, your son needs open heart surgery. We need to take him to Stanford Hospital. We were in another town about an hour away. And they said, if he survives the ride there. And so they had to wheel me to him, and I kissed him goodbye and waited for the doctors to tell me how the surgery went. And they basically said, we're not hopeful, because we usually have 1 or 2 things that are wrong with the heart. And there was like all 5 things were wrong. And so they did the best they could. And then they said, we're going to wait and see. And they were wonderful. Like, they had just a team of doctors and nurses 24/7 around the whole NICU, observing these babies each day. And so we would get reports, and little by little, by the end of the 2 weeks, all his organs were shutting down. And then they came to us at that end and said, he's clinically brain dead. And so we had to make the choice to take him off life support. And my ex-husband's like, you need to do this. You're the strong one. You've had all this other trauma. You can do this. And I'm 6 years old, and I'm thinking, this is my life right now. Like, am I in a dream? And really, really, because I wasn't a Christian, I I thought, gosh, does God really hate me this much that he's doing this to me? But again, having something innately, the Holy Spirit, I asked the doctors, is there a priest or a pastor around that I can talk to? Because I feel like this is something bigger than a decision I can make. And they said, oh yes, Phylis, we have a priest on staff. And so he came to me and he gave me such comforting words and basically told me, like, your body is a shell. His spirit has already gone with the Lord. If he's meant to be here, even if you took him off of all of the hookups, he will be fine. But chances are God's already got him. And so you're looking at his body as the whole thing, but that's not the whole thing. And it was just like, wow, the way he explained it, I thought, okay, so my baby's safe. My baby is loved by God and he's going to be okay. And he'll be with God if this is his choice. And so we chose to take him off and we held him in our arms and we said goodbye. And I literally just thought, I don't know how much more my brain and body can take. Like, I just don't. And it was probably the one time where, I had this little inkling of just ending it all because I thought, what am I here for? Like, you're not even allowing me to have a child. Like, I just don't get it. And I know now God doesn't work that way, but that's how I felt. And when you come from trauma and you have that more trauma thrown on top of it, there's just a limit where you just feel like there just isn't one more thing I can take. So a few months after, I was sitting at the kitchen table, and this is where I say, I didn't hear God's still small voice. I heard a voice. I kept saying, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I thought I was going to be a mom. Like, I don't know, what am I doing in this marriage? I'm creating the same dysfunction. I can see myself like having affairs like my mom. I could see myself drinking like I could just see it. And I heard this voice, like someone was standing next to me saying, start over. And I kind of looked around like, who? I looked outside. I mean, I just thought, I'm going crazy. And I heard it twice. And something in me was just like, yeah. And I wrote a letter and I said, I left my ring. I didn't ask for anything. I said, I'm leaving. Don't ask me to come back this time. I need to find me. And I called a friend and I said, I have no job and I have nowhere to stay. And she said, oh, we're hiring at my company. You can sleep on my couch for 3 months. And that started a slow journey to come out of this fog of like, I'm doing everything wrong. Like, I have to stop doing this. And so I tease my daughters because my oldest she just turned 30 and my youngest is 26. And I say, your 20s are your crying years because you do everything wrong in your 20s, thinking you're really an adult, but you have all these like crazy things happen. And they laugh now. They go, yeah, you're kind of right. Like, it's just this crazy. So if you add that on top of traumatized kids in their 20s, you do massively things wrong. And so at 26, 27, I was like, this has to stop because it's all fun and games when you're in your 20s. But if you hit your 30s and you're not figuring it out, then that's when the addictions and the things like really dive in more. It's like, then it's harder for you to change those things, I think. And so not impossible, but a little bit harder. And so I just went on this dive and it was not a straight up shot to like, oh, it's great now. Like, I still made a lot of mistakes, but I lived on my own and I really tried to figure out like, who was I? And so then, I did end up meeting my husband now is 31 years and 2 kids later. But, I found my way back to God at 35 years old. And
I want to talk more about that after we come back from the break. Friends, today's episode has got so many layers to it. And I know that so many struggle in their relationship with their earthly parents. But when we come back from the break, I'm going to ask Phylis to share a little bit more about how did she come from such a traumatic and dysfunctional childhood to now being so successful and having repaired some of those relationships. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back to your Hope-Filled Perspective, where today I'm talking with Phylis Mantelli, and we're talking about hope for healing mother-daughter relationships. Phyllis's book is called Unmothered, and I just want to share part of the introduction with you because it sums up really what we're talking about today. Phylis says, you see it every day. Mothers and daughters at lunch together or shopping at the mall, walking, sometimes hand in hand, laughing, crying, perhaps arguing, or just having a moment. Sometimes those moments become a larger part of life. Mothers and daughters take vacations together, start businesses together, or move in next door. Is that typical? I wondered. Too much? Just enough? What does a normal relationship between a mother and daughter look like? It took me a long time to answer because my relationship with my mom didn't look like any of that. Mothers are supposed to be overprotective, always loving, and always there for you. At least that's what the Hallmark cards and movies say. What if you grew up without that kind of mom? That's my story. I didn't understand normal mother-daughter relationships. My relationship with my mom was different than what I saw in others because it lacked intimacy, involvement, or any concern for my well-being. I grew up feeling empty, alone, and hurt. And because of it, I wondered, am I damaged goods that can never heal? Phylis, I know that you came to know the Lord a little bit later in life. And I'm curious how you found your faith as an adult and how your faith maybe changed your answer to that question that you asked. Am I just damaged goods that can never heal?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I was remarried and I was pregnant with my second daughter, and my youngest was 3.5. And I started feeling like everything was really sweet in my home life, but I felt this pull to thank somebody bigger than me. And I started talking to people. I almost felt like a fear that if I didn't bless this child, like I just felt this doom, And I think like playing Russian roulette because I had lost my son and I had Ariel and I was like, she's perfect, she's beautiful. And then it's like, okay, let's get pregnant again. And we did it again. And I'm 6 months pregnant. And I just started feeling like, oh, what if something happens? Like, what if this beautiful, like, because we were great. Like we had a, great relationship. We were coasting along pretty well. And I don't know, there was just this pull of like, you need to thank someone for this beautiful life. And so I started talking to friends about going back to church, but I wanted to go to a different kind of church. And, God works wonderful ways. He put me, my daycare lady said, oh, I'm going on vacation, but I'm going to have you have Ariel stay with this other person I know. Well, it was somebody I knew from high school that had become a Christian. Coincidence. And so I ended up spending like an hour every day after pickup. Just we would, reminisce and catch up. And then we'd get into these God conversations. And she said, I have a great church for you to go to. And it was right around the time, right before Christmas time or around December, because they were doing their Christmas program. And I'll never forget, I walked in with my little 3-year-old pregnant, and people were laughing and having fun, and the kids were so cute. And I can't even tell you really what the sermon was about, but I literally felt a zing through my body. And I just started bawling, and I was like, this was what I was missing. This is what I need. And I went home and I told my husband, like, I just love this church. I think I want to be a Christian. And he was like, that's great, honey, for you. I'm not going. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like why? I was so mad at God. I was like, why would you bring me all this way? I'm so excited, enlightened, everything. And it was like, I could hear God saying, do you trust me? Mm. And And it was kind of my first little dealing with faith versus just, the rote habits of what, you do. He was like, do you trust me? Let me handle your husband. This is your walk. This is your faith. I'm taking you on a journey. So for 3.5 years, I went to church with my children by myself. And every once in a while, he would peek his little head in and he's like, nope, don't like it, and our marriage was great in every other way. And I was so mad at God. I was just like, and one time our pastor did the sermon on how our faith is our own and you need to let God take control and you need to not, try to decide when somebody should come to the faith. And I went, okay, I get it. And so I started, when my husband said, well, you guys going to church? And the snarky me wanted to be like, well, what do you think? We always go to church. I would be like, yeah, we're going to church. And he's like, well, maybe I'll go with you. And it was this slow build. And we look back at that now and we laugh because my husband reads his Bible every morning. We have these awesome discussions about, different podcasts and things we listen to that are spiritual. And we just laugh because I'm like, look where he brought us. But, he also brought me back to my mom. And that was when I really had to learn how to dig in and go further into who the person she was, like you were talking about earlier. It's like they were damaged. But as a child, we don't get to see that and we don't understand that. If we still don't understand that as an adult, we can never get back to the person of who they really are and loving them where they are, just like God loves us where we are. And so God taught me a huge lesson in forgiveness. And it wasn't so much about, wrapping it up in a nice little bow. My mom never admitted to the things that she had put us through. She would say, oh, it wasn't that bad. You're dramatic, that kind of thing. So I wasn't doing it for her. I was doing it because I knew it was the right thing to do to honor my mom, taking care of her while she was ill. And also having my daughters see this is how you honor a parent, even when they're not that lovable. We had definite boundaries and things that we set in place, but, my mom had nobody and my other siblings didn't want anything to do with her. And, she passed away from dementia in 2007. And I literally knew that I had done everything that a daughter could do to make my mom feel loved. And God gave me little snippets where my mom would say these loving things and stroke my hair. And I was almost in shock. Like, what are you doing? And then it just broke me. And I could hear God saying, take this in. You need to hear these words because you are worth it. And so if I had not gone through that 16-year journey of taking care of my mom, and it was not easy, I don't think I would have been filled with those loving moments and I wouldn't be the same person. And I know that because my daughters have witnessed that, I see the love they pour into me when I need it and how they support me. And it's because of that. And so God brought us all in that circular motion of, just the forgiveness and the love that only God can do, because we can't do it in our humanness. We're too selfish and bitter, and we have all these walls built up of, you did this to me, and so I'm not going to give back to you. It can only come from him.
I think about how Jesus died on the cross for me as a sinner before I even asked him to, before I ever repented or confessed or asked for forgiveness. And in working with people in my field, it has become a cliche, except that it's true that hurt people hurt people.
Yeah.
And what I have learned is that if we can separate people from their actions,
Mm-hmm.
it makes it so much easier to extend forgiveness and mercy and grace and compassion towards the person. You know, I think it was Paul in scripture who says, why do I do the things that I don't want to do these things? Mm-hmm. It's not me who does them. It's the evil that dwells within me. Mm-hmm. And so if I can look at a person who has wronged me and choose not to take an offense, but recognize they're just being a pawn by the enemy. They don't even realize how they're being used. It's easier to extend forgiveness. And forgiveness does not mean that we're going to forget everything they did. And in an abusive situation, particularly, it does not mean that we have to walk back and be abused again. But what it does mean is it's basically telling God, you are so much better equipped to handle this in their heart than I am. So I just have to let you deal with it. But I'd be curious from your perspective, why is forgiveness so important when you've been hurt by a parent? And I say by a parent because we've been socialized to think our parents should know better. Because they're older, they should be wiser, they should be more experienced. So why is it so important to forgive the parent who has hurt us?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I want to talk about, you said, because they should know better, is what I question and have people think about is you need to take your parents off the pedestal.
Yes.
And look at them as a person.
Yes.
Because when I was able to look back in my parents' lives, my mother was unmothered at 9 years old. So she was traumatized from the get-go. My dad was left by his mom, the youngest of 6 children. The mother walked out with another man and left all the kids behind. She didn't want him. She didn't want the 6th child. So he was separated by his siblings till he was 10. So you have these 2 parents that came together that were so damaged, right? And then they became parents. They had no equipping of that. And so I think people think that when you put the label of parent on you, that all of a sudden you're supposed to have all the answers. You're supposed to be great at this. Everyone's supposed to, look up to you no matter what you do. And so I always say, take all that away. I hate the term blood's thicker than water. So I tell people, you wouldn't let a stranger or a friend come into your house and talk to you rudely, be rude to your kids or abuse your kids or anything like that. But since somebody has the label relative on them, we allow people to come in and do whatever they want that are related to us, because it's like, well, that's my mom. Well, that's my dad. But you can't allow that. So forgiveness isn't about allowing them to do whatever they want. And you just say, oh, I just forgive everything you're doing. Forgiveness is more for you to open your heart to the possibility that even if this person doesn't get better, God is asking you to move in a new direction, because that's going to have good consequences for the next generation. So the forgiveness was for my children to see how to open their hearts through a love of God, only that he's the only one that could allow this compassion and empathy for someone. When I could look at my mom as a broken child, then I could look back and say, oh, poor little lady. Like, I feel bad for her. It doesn't excuse the things that she did and the things she put us through. But when I came to her in that posture, she was shocked, because she was so used to people just coming at her and she had to fight for everything. And I was like, Mom, we're not going to do that. Like, I love you. I told her one time, I don't care what you say to me. I'm not leaving you. And it just stopped her in her tracks, because everyone had left her and she was so used to that. So forgiveness is this, it really is a God-given gift, because there were many times we would have a rough day and I'd go back to my car and I would just be bawling and I would scream at God and say, why don't you just take her? She hates being here. Why am I taking care of her? And he would say to me quietly, patience and grace, patience and grace. And I'm like, I have none of that. I don't know why you're telling me this. Well, in the book later on, there's a reason why he said that. And so it all came back around full circle. But if I didn't have a relationship with God, to be able to scream at him and talk to him and go back the next day, because he's like, dig in, girl, it's okay. Like, you show love, even if she doesn't. It's this supernatural thing that just like you do it, and you can do it with, I have like life lessons that I tell people, you do it with certain things in place, because it's not about you being a martyr. It's not about you doing things that are uncomfortable. It's within this realm, you can really do these things that create healthy boundaries and create, a healthy place between you and her, so that you can create a healthy place between you and your family. My family always felt safe. I never put them in a situation with my crazy family members to come in and, create chaos in the house. I don't let toxic people in my house. I'll meet them somewhere else, but you can't come into my house and stir stuff up, because I'm creating new. And that's what God taught me, so that's how you get to a better place. That's when you start knowing you deserve better. You don't have to stay in the pit.
And I know that in this journey, you've learned many lessons. Just briefly share one or two that will encourage our listeners that, what I have come to realize is things are not always as they seem. And especially when we're in a crisis or we're in a difficult relationship, we can only see one layer. We can't see that God is working behind the scenes.
Yeah.
For the good of all of his children. So just a lesson or two that you've learned through this.
Yeah. So some of the things that I was kind of touching upon, like setting healthy boundaries. People think that's a cruel thing. I think healthy boundaries are the best thing that you can do when you have toxic family members. And so I don't allow people to come. I used to allow people to come in and just try to come in and tell me how I was doing everything wrong and I should be this way and we should do this and going through my stuff and just craziness. And my husband and I were like, we don't want that in our house. And so I started thinking like, what would a healthy boundary look like? And the same with my mom. We would try to bring my mom into a beautiful setting. Listen, when people are sick, it doesn't matter. What's that you can't put lipstick on a pig. Like I would buy nice clothes for her and be like, come over for Christmas. Like, let me show you my beautiful life. But no, what would happen is she would come in and stir the pot home. And so I'm like, this is backwards. Like, this isn't right. So I started setting healthy boundaries where I said, I will come to you. I will bring things to you. You're not allowed to come to my house because she just couldn't handle it. And, you can meet someone at a restaurant. If somebody's calling you and they're being crazy, you can hang up on them. Like there are things that you can do to create healthy boundaries. If you want to change the direction of where you've come from, it's healthy to set those boundaries. You have to change the dynamic in your family. Otherwise, it will just keep continuing on and on and on. And breaking generational dysfunction, it all goes with that, again, looking back to really understand where these parents have come from, I think is super important for you to get to that place and just realize that, they're broken. That doesn't mean you have to stay broken.
That's good. Friends, we're going to be right back after a short commercial break. You know that I always love to wrap up the program by asking my guests to share a hope-filled perspective. So when we come back, I'm going to ask Phylis to share her hope-filled perspective. We'll be right back. Welcome back to your hope-filled perspective. Today, we're talking about hope for rebuilding and restoring mother-daughter relationships. And my guest today has been talking about just that journey that she has walked through. Phylis, your story about your mom, in the long run, really became a love story of types. Can you just touch on that real briefly? Because I would imagine we've got some listeners who can't even imagine that that is possible.
Yeah. And that's, it was funny because when we did the title, I was like, gosh, it sounds so, people say, I start to cry when I hear the title, and I go, no, it's okay. It's a love story. Because I think, again, just through having a spirit-filled mind was the only way I could get back to really looking at my mom through a different lens and really understanding that she needed love too. And she's going to push it away because she's damaged. But in the long run, like I said before, she would say these little things that would just bring me to my knees. She told me one time, I bet you're just a really good mom and you're such a good daughter. And she didn't say things like that lightly. At the time, I was also on my knees washing her legs that were infected. So I was like, well, this is prophetic. And she was patting my head, and I was like washing her feet in this tub. And I was like, of all times for that to happen. So I like to tell people never to give up hope. I know that there are some relationships. I do have friends whose moms are extremely dangerous. And I want to preface by saying, look at the situation of where you can handle having any kind of a relationship with your mom. And if it's something that's very, very damaging, protect yourself first at all costs. I really want to caution that. But again, I think the hope comes from knowing, hopefully what you've heard here is just knowing you have control to change the trajectory of your life. You're the only one with God to have him guide you. I love Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, because on our own understanding, we could never do the things to make our lives better. But following God's path, we can always seek a new life, no matter how many starts and stops. And I've had a lot of them up until 35 years old, start and stops. And then we've had other start and stops in our marriage. And so I am a huge hope-filled perspective person, because I know even when we're going through a little struggle here or there, or a big struggle here or there, I just ask God, you know what? Just guide me through it. Understand it. I don't like it. I may be crying, I may be on my knees, but help me walk through it. I may not have the answer for it at the end. I may never know why I don't know why my son passed away at 26 years old. I will never know that, but I do know that he's looking after us, and I know that he's cheering his mama on. And that's the hope-filled perspective that I have, is I know that even in the darkest parts of my story, I can look back at the history of my life, and I have seen how God has walked me through some things. So I don't need to have the answer to all of it, but I know, looking back through my history, that there is hope. There is always hope. And when I see my family now, I am in awe. And so, we're always going to go through struggles. We're always going to have hard times. But I think, with God being able to guide the force through it, and letting us know, like, stay with me, I got you. We need to deserve to think of ourselves as more deserving. We need to think higher of ourselves. I think that's the thing, is when you come from trauma, you don't think well of yourself, and you don't think you deserve it. I'm telling you, you so deserve it. God really loves you and wants that for you, but you have to grasp it and hold on and walk out of that dark tunnel.
Oh, Phylis, thank you so much for coming on and sharing the testimony of just how far God has brought you, from being raised with an alcoholic, narcissistic mom to coming to the place where you could wash her feet, literally. And Share with her the love of Jesus through your actions. Listeners, I don't know what you're going through, but we all struggle with difficult relationships. And sometimes it's with those that we're supposed to love the most, or who we expect should love us the most. And one of the things that I know to be true is that quite frequently, we teach people how to treat us. And so what Phylis was sharing about setting healthy boundaries, that is a good nugget to take away from today's episode, because in setting healthy boundaries, we are teaching people what is acceptable for how they treat us. But I want you to take it a step further, not only set those healthy boundaries, but such a focus of Phylis's testimony is the importance of forgiving those who have hurt us. It doesn't make it right what they did, but it releases us from the inner turmoil and bondage. And then the third thing that I think Phylis just really emphasized today is the importance of listening to God's voice and doing what God tells us to do. We have to discern which voice are we listening to. Are we listening to the voice of the enemy? And he's the one who wants us to be angry and bitter and resentful and to try to get back at those who have hurt us? Or are we listening to the voice of God, who's behind the scenes working all things together for our good? There were so many good nuggets that I hope you were able to take away from today's episode. If today encouraged you at all, would you consider going to your favorite podcast platform, rating and reviewing this program? But even more importantly, will you share it with friends who you know need a hope-filled perspective? Maybe friends who are struggling with a mother-daughter relationship or any other relationship, because these principles still apply. I thank you for being with Phylis and I today. As always, I'm Dr. Michelle Bengtson, and this has been another episode of Your Hope-Filled Perspective. Until we chat again next week, may you have a hope-filled week.